All right, great. So moving right along into what it is that we'll be covering during this webinar. We're going to start off with a brief introduction of those of us that are running this webinar today. And then we will move into the overview of your role as an academic editor. And in particular, highlighting the various resources that we have for you at key stages along your academic editor journey, if you will. And the whole point of that is to just highlight, not to have you memorize everything, obviously, right now, but to highlight where you can find these resources later on and to provide a brief overview of the contents that are within them. So that's what we'll cover for the bulk of the presentation. Then, as I mentioned earlier, we will have a dedicated question and answer section where we can have an open discussion about any questions that you might still have. We'll quickly wrap up and then we'll leave it open and do some breakout rooms so that way you can get to know other editorial board members as we're all distributed across the world at this point. So moving along to introductions, starting with myself, I'm Dina Emerson. I'm the editorial board experience manager on the editorial board services team. And we are a team dedicated completely to editorial boards across all of the different PLOS journals. So everything from identifying areas in subject need in terms of coverage and going out and recruiting editors in that area, to keeping manuscripts moving along through the peer review process, and of course, running training and developing resources such as this. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Susan to introduce herself.
Hey, I'm Susan Hepp. I'm the executive editor of PLOS Water. I've been at PLOS about 1.5 years now. Before this, I was on the cancer and medicine team, which is now the public health and medicine team. And I did a lot of infectious disease work, including COVID. And so I'm coming at this from definitely more of the water sanitation side. I'm very excited to be here, and I will be kind of your point person if you need anything on the editorial side. And let me pass it to Pierre.
Hi, everyone. I'm Pierre Horwitz. I'm one of the 2 co-editors-in-chief for PLOS Water. And I'm from Edith Cowan University in Perth, Western Australia, along with my colleague, Jenna Davis, who is from Stanford. Where, as I said, we're the editors-in-chief, and we're enjoying this journey, this new journey that we've embarked on very much already, and we're delighted to have such a great group of editorial board members. Thanks for joining us today.
All right, and so to introduce yourselves, I've got a little bit of a poll here where you can fill out just to get the sense I'm logged in from another device. Your polling session is inactive. Okay, well, there's a pretty manageable group of us here on the call, so maybe you can just chime in with a brief introduction of yourself, how long you've been an active researcher, and then a little bit about where you're calling in from and your previous editorial board experience. So Diego, you're first on my little Brady Bunch thing here, so I'm gonna call on you.
Hello to everyone. My name is Diego. I am calling from Chile, South America. I have been working in water resources for the last 20 years. Currently, I am working at the Universidad del Desarrollo, which is a private university located in Santiago. And this is my 3rd appointment as associate editor. I have been part of the board of the Hydrological Science Journal, and also from a local journal here in Chile dedicated to water and agriculture. I am very happy to be here.
It's great to have you.
Yeah, thanks. And then Dasapta?
I think they had a message that they were switching to a mobile device, so I'm not sure if they're having trouble. There we go.
Oh, look at you in your mask. Wonderful.
Yeah, hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me in this editorial board. My name is Dasapta. I'm calling from Indonesia. I'm working as a hydrogeologist, lecturer in Institut Teknologi Bandung, the oldest engineering institute in Indonesia. And my experience in hydrogeology is has started from early 2000s, right? So it's close to 20 years now. This is my first assignment in international journal as an editor. Previously, I am working as an editor in several journals published in Indonesia. Thank you.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad to have you on this international journal.
That's great. All right, and I see Cassie's turned her video off, so I'm just gonna move quite along. So I'm gonna pass it off to Susan now, who's gonna introduce this journal that we're all a part of.
Yeah, so just echoing everybody else, thanks so much for being here. We're excited. We had one session this morning, so sorry you didn't get to meet those academic editors, but glad that there's a few of you here today. So I just wanted to go over kind of the mission of our journal and the scope of our journal, and kind of an exciting bit about our finance model that's very equity minded. And so first, one of our first and foremost goals as a journal is to be equitable and to have global representation. So what that means is that we really want to make sure that there's as little barriers as possible for everybody who's doing research to be able to publish with us. And we want to make sure that we're seeing research from all over the world. And so this is also reflected in choosing everybody on the editorial board, such as yourselves. We really tried to get a really wide swath of people from all different types of water research areas. We have people from WASH, we have people from water resources, we have hydrologists, we have engineers, we have the whole 9 yards. We're very excited about that because this is really a journal for all water research, and it has a very broad scope that we're very proud of. We're also an open access journal, and so we really believe that all readers should be able to have access to the full details of the entire article along with all the data, because really that's the best way to push science forward in this field is how we feel. And in a more broad sense, we're also very into open science at PLOS. And so that is open access publishing, but that's also kind of advocacy in the community, supporting things like, probably there's more experimental things like open laboratory notebooks and things like that. So really any type of open science initiative, we're very, very supportive of. One thing that also supports our global equity mission and scope is our financing model. So typically journals have an article publishing fee, and which we still have that. And that's kind of a pay per article publication fee. We try to keep ours as fair as possible, but we also realize that there's a lot of people in lower income countries or people without a lot of research input, research coming from their country on a particular area, where it's going to be a barrier for them to publish with us if they have to pay a certain fee. And so we're very proud to have this global equity publishing model, where first, the bottom line is that no researcher is turned away for lack of funds. So if you're part of a Research for Life country, for example, we waive the article processing fee. If you're not, then we're moving towards an institutional model where institutions, we kind of negotiate out a tiered and reduced fee, overall fee that we charge at the institutional level instead of charging each individual researcher per article. And this helps because it takes off the burden from the researcher. Some institutions already have funds that are earmarked for open access journal publication fees. And so it really helps to distribute the cost and to really reduce the cost. So if you're from a lower income country, or if your country has or institution has a lower historical output in your field, then that fee is going to be quite diminished. And so if you'd like more information on that, just please contact me. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Dina to talk about the editorial board.
Yeah, perfect. So again, you'll see me jumping in and out of this presentation, and just to mention as well, you'll get these slides and the recording after this session, and so it'll have the links embedded in it. So anything that we mentioned today, you'll be able to access again later on. So I did want to highlight just this resource of where it is that you can find out who else is on the editorial board. So our first sojourn out of this presentation is going to be over to the PLOS Water website, where we have this list of editorial board members listed here, and you will be able to scroll down and see the board members that have joined the board so far, a little information about them and about the section, and a little bit about their subject area expertise. A quick note about this one is that we do update this page manually, so if your name is not appearing on the website yet, it will be in due time. And then a brief distinction between section editors and academic editors. Because this is a new journal and we're still building it up, the role of a section editor in particular is still an evolving piece. Traditionally, section editors at PLOS have been subject matter experts in particular areas within the scope of a journal, and have committed to providing consultations on manuscripts in which we need an external consultation, for example. Perhaps there's a methodology that we need an expert opinion on. But in this new journal, a section editor role might look a little different. And then academic editors is what you are doing, and moving right into the academic editor role, which you will have seen during the recruitment and onboarding process of joining PLOS Water. But in short, an academic editor oversees the peer review process for a manuscript from beginning to end. So from the time that you decide to accept an invitation to handle a manuscript, deciding whether to send it out for peer review or not, if you do send it out for peer review, securing reviewers and then assessing those reviews as they come in, and then ultimately issuing a decision. So you do have a high degree of autonomy as an academic editor to shape the publication landscape here at PLOS. Another thing that I do want to point out, and again, you will have seen during the joining process, is our code of conduct for editorial board members. Ethics is something that we take very seriously here at PLOS. We have an entire editorial team dedicated to publication ethics. And it is something, of course, that we expect everyone that is affiliated with PLOS to also uphold. And again, this slide here links out to the PLOS Editor Center, where we host this code of conduct if you'd like to refresh and read more or share with anyone. All right, now jumping into the bulk of our presentation here, and this is the content with which you will be operating along your role as an academic editor. Editorial Manager is the submission system that we use to manage the peer review process at PLOS. And then when you're first getting started, we've already set you up with an account and the appropriate permissions as an academic editor in Editorial Manager. But I do want to point out some key kind of getting started tips and the resources that we have available for navigating Editorial Manager. So jumping out of this presentation again, you'll see this guide to Editorial Manager, which is a screenshot step-by-step guide to the various things that you're going to be needing to do along your academic editor journey. So when you first get started, a very important piece is to help indicate your areas of expertise and make sure that all of your contact information is up to date. Email is the main mode of communication for everything at PLOS. And so it's really important to have a current contact information in there, as well as at plos.org or at editorial manager noted as a safe sender in your email, so that way the emails don't go to spam. But yeah, once you log into Editorial Manager, if you click on this top navigation bar, the Update My Information page, this will take you to a pretty standard profile page where you can update your contact information or your institution, etc. And you can also indicate your areas of expertise here. By clicking on personal keywords, you can type in any free text that best captures your area of expertise, which is very helpful for Susan and other staff editors to send you manuscripts that are within your appropriate expertise. So in addition to the research bio that we collected from you when you joined, adding in these free text keywords is a great searchable way that she can find you in Editorial Manager. The last thing that I wanted to point out in this kind of getting started portion of Editorial Manager is this unavailable dates feature, which is important if you are anticipating a particularly busy semester or you're going to be away from your computer for any length of time. Just adding in those unavailability dates and noting whether you're available to handle revisions or not is particularly helpful for us. So let's say that it is going to be a very busy semester for you, so you don't want to take on any new manuscript invitations, but you are available to handle those revisions once the author submits the revised manuscript. Just make a note there. You can add in some free text here and say, oh, it's busy, but I can handle revisions, for example. Okay, and then moving along into the life of a manuscript as it goes through PLOS Water. From the time that an author submits the manuscript, there's various stages along here in which we perform technical checks. So you'll see one here after any sort of revision decision, anytime the manuscript comes back, and then before publication here. These checks are for things like, did the authors fill out all of the appropriate portions of the submission form? Do they have the data underlying their manuscript? Those kinds of more technical type checks. Another portion of this life of a manuscript that I wanted to point out is the subscan section, which stands for submission scanning. And this is a part that Susan or another staff editor would do, and it's a more editorial level type check. So we're looking for things like, does the manuscript fit within the scope of the journal? Or have the ethics been performed to a high standard? And other things along those lines. And Susan may leave notes in the manuscript that she'd like to call your attention to as the subject matter expert. So for example, some methodology was used and she might point it out and ask you to verify that that is a standard or a high methodological rigor that's typical in that field. Moving along to the first of the quick guides that we have. So all of these can be found on the resources for editors page, which I'll show you later. But each of these guides go through the key steps at which you kind of, I think of them as like forks in the road. It points at which you need to make a decision. So the first of which is when you would receive a manuscript invitation, how to find the important information about that manuscript in that email, and then how to decide whether it would be a good idea for you to handle it or not. And so toggling over to this guide that we have, this is what it would look like. Moving into the invitation anatomy, if you will. So the best way to recognize these manuscript invitations is they'll start off with a subject, PLOS in all caps. So they're pretty easy to pick out of your inbox. As I mentioned, all email communications from PLOS do come in through email, and we all have pretty busy email inboxes, I'm sure. So that's a key way to zero in on the emails coming from PLOS. And then within this manuscript invitation, you'll have key information about the manuscript itself. Of course, the number and the title of the manuscript. Also important here is the list of all of the authors on the manuscript, which is a really quick and easy way to determine if you know any of the authors. And so you might be able to surface any potential conflicts of interest right there from the manuscript invitation. And then here at the bottom of the email, you're going to have the keywords as provided by the authors and the abstract itself, so you can get a sense about what that paper is about. And then also contained within this email invitation are ways in which you can interact with the invitation itself that'll navigate you over to Editorial Manager directly. So for example, clicking here will take you over to a screen where you can download the full submission if you want to read more about it before deciding whether to accept or decline. And then even right here within the email, accepting the invitation to handle the manuscript or declining can also be done. Here is a pretty generalized peer review timeline that would help you determine whether you would have enough time to take on a manuscript, which is a very important bullet point when you're thinking about am I available to take on this manuscript invitation? So this table here that's in this guide is some guidance on what to consider if you're thinking about if you have an invitation in your inbox and you're deciding whether it would be appropriate to accept or decline the invitation. Of course, determining if you have any competing interests or even perceived competing interests is pretty important to consider. Is it in your area of expertise, of course? And then this nuanced piece a little bit is about its suitability for peer review. So if you feel that a manuscript is not suitable for peer review, it still may be appropriate to accept that invitation if it's in your area of expertise, because then you can issue that first decision and decide whether decide to not send it out for peer review, for example. But again, that's on a manuscript by manuscript basis. So we're not going to give any sort of blanket recommendations there. All right, and with that, I'm going to pass it over to Susan, who's going to go into some of the editorial content at key points along this peer review timeline, starting with the initial evaluation.
There we go. All right, hello again. Yeah, so like Dina said, I'll take you through some of the more specific editorial steps and decisions that you'll have to make as an academic editor. So first, this first 3-day period, so you'll get your invitation as Dina showed you through your email, and you'll have about 3 days. We ask for a little bit of a quick turnaround for this to decide whether it's within your expertise, whether it meets the publication criteria to a reasonable extent, whether it's at a high enough caliber to go out to review or not. And so we have this quick guide for initial evaluation to help you out there. Let me go to that. All right, so like I said, you'll be using the publication criteria and your own subject matter expertise, because I'll be assigning you based on your subject matter expertise. So the publication criteria, some of them are very similar to many other journals. Of course, it has to present original research. It can't have been published anywhere else. There's a high methodological and ethical rigor of the paper, but there's a couple of things that are maybe a little bit more specific to PLOS. One is that we don't judge on novelty. So novelty can be a very subjective term. What we mean by that is we still want it to contribute to the base of academic knowledge. And so if it doesn't contribute anything whatsoever, then you could still reject based on it doesn't add to the basis of academic knowledge. But for example, even if you had a study, for example, that was done in Bangladesh, and then this paper is on the exact same type of study with the same methods, but it's done somewhere else, and no one's done that study on that different population, we would still consider that important and adding to the basis of academic knowledge. So we would want you to still send that out as long as it seems like it reasonably fit within the other publication criteria. And that's something you're going to need to use a little bit more of your own academic judgment for. But just pointing that out for you, that there is a little bit of a bar for adding to the contribution to science, but it's not about perceived impact. The other thing that I wanted to point out here is that because we are very equity-minded, we do want to give authors from countries where English is not their first language a fair try and the opportunity to get their paper reviewed. So I'll be looking at all these papers in an initial step before I send them out to any of you academic editors. And I'll be looking at whether it reasonably fits in our scope, whether it reasonably fits our ethical guidelines, and also I'll be doing a language check. And so for some of these papers, the quality of the English language is not high enough for me to send it to you, and simply because some of them it's hard to understand. So what I'll do at that point is I'll send it back to them and I'll say, we would really like you to resubmit, but first we really need you to copy edit it first. And so then usually they'll send it back and then it will be at a high enough caliber to send out. Once in a while we get papers that there's just some grammatical errors and things like that. And usually in that case, I'll go ahead and send it out because it's completely understandable, but it would need to be copy edited before we publish anything. So usually I'll just leave you a note. When you accept the paper, you'll be able to see all of my notes that I leave you. Some of them might be on methods, some of them might be on language, things like that. Okay. All right. Oh, yes. And the other thing is that we also don't expect you to copy edit the manuscripts. Definitely that I see Good Samaritans doing that, which is wonderful, but also don't feel like if that makes or breaks the decision in the time that you have to review a paper and to handle a paper, it's completely reasonable that you just say, we would like you to copy edit this and leave it at that. That's okay. Okay. So when you have your first initial decision, it's either going to go out for peer review or you're going to reject it. So reasons to reject without review would be one, it's just the methodological quality is low. You're an expert in this field. We trust you very much to be able to judge that. So that's one thing that really can't be fixed just through rewriting, for example. Another reason you might reject is if the conclusions are completely unsupported by the data. So maybe they did a study and the methods are fine, but what they're saying in their conclusions and results just are not supported. They're just like so much a stretch that they would really have to rewrite the entire paper in order for it to be reasonable. So in that case, you could also reject without review. Now, there's gray areas there. You know, sometimes you'll see a few sentences in the conclusions where you won't agree or you think that they really overstretched or are saying something about causality, for example, where that type of study, you can't really say what cause and effect is. Then to you, depending on how much of that you see, of whether you want to leave notes for the authors and say, please revise this. We feel that this is overstated, or if it's bad enough, then it is okay to reject without review. But we do ask that you just leave comments explaining why in your letter. Okay. All right. So, all right. So one of the hardest things that I hear from academic editors is how to find and secure reviewers. And it can be a long process. So we have some suggestions for you, and we suggest that you start early. So the key takeaways for this is that what makes a suitable reviewer is if they have expertise in the subject area. And so we ask that you secure at least 2 reviews for every paper, and those reviewers should cover the entirety of the subject matter in the paper. You know, there's always cases where statistics is in every paper, so you don't necessarily need to have a statistics expert, but somebody who would reasonably know how to, you know, if you have clinical data, for example, somebody who would know how to evaluate that and the statistical tests that were done, for example. Also, as Dina said, you want to do a quick check for, just like with authors for you want to do a quick check with reviewers for the authors, whether they have conflicts of interest with the authors, which we usually define as having some type of ongoing collaboration or published papers with them in the last 5 years. How you're going to how you're going to invite reviewers is through the program editorial manager, which we showed you a little bit before. And we have this quick guide here for other tips and some of the specifics about finding reviewers and inviting them through editorial manager. So the time frame that we give people to review is 10 days is what it says in the letter. It can be anywhere from 10 to 21 days for various reasons. Sometimes people say, well, 10 days is really too short for me because I have other obligations. Could I please get an extension? And we're usually very happy to do that as long as it's not longer than 21 days. If you're having trouble finding reviewers and you do have somebody who says, I would do this, but it's too short of a time frame, then you're welcome to go back to them and offer them an extension. We just ask that it's not longer than 21 days so that the authors aren't waiting for a really long time to hear back. Okay, so these we already talked about. Oh yeah, and we do ask that these people will have subject level expertise, and we trust your judgment on that, but we do prefer that they're at a postdoc level or above. So sometimes there's exceptional graduate students who already have 20 papers, but just kind of as a guideline. Okay, so how do you figure out who to invite? So our first suggestion is invite researchers that you already know. So these are people from your network, people you've met at conferences, people that you've collaborated with, people that you have a professional relationship with, and you have a lot of confidence that they have the right expertise to take on this paper and to give them a good review. And the reason we say to invite these people first is because of your professional relationship, that they're the most likely to say yes. And so we suggest that because you need to secure at least 2 reviews, that as early as you can, we suggest inviting a batch of 6 to 8 people, because we find that that usually results in 2 reviewers. If you exhaust that pool, then the second thing that we suggest is inviting other researchers whose work you know. So, maybe it's research groups that you're following, people who you just think have the greatest work, that you want to collaborate with them in the future, people like that, because you also have confidence and you know their work, you know their subject matter expertise pretty well. And they're still in your extended network, so they still have some chance, some likely chance of saying yes. And then if that also falls through, then there are a lot of tools online. I use these as well sometimes. And so PubMed, Google Scholar, Web of Science, I use all the time, because once in a while on PLOS One, we would help with reviewer research. So these, you could just look up the subject matter. You've probably used these already. So there's a lot of other additional tips on this document and the links in this document. So I encourage you to click around, because this can be one of the hardest things to do. And also I'd encourage you to personalize the message if you know the person, because that can really help to get them to say, oh, this is actually from my professional colleague. It's not just a template email, and they're much more likely to respond that way. So we have a lot of different guides, both technical and suggestion guides for what to do for inviting reviewers. And so we have more information on this on the reviewer for resources for editors page. And also we have a screenshot guide, which is a great resource if you're having any technical difficulties for figuring out or navigating Editorial Manager for inviting reviewers. Okay. And I think I already went through the, oh yes. The last kind of nice thing about Editorial Manager is that you will want to check it periodically to see if people have replied, if people have declined or accepted the invitation. But there's a few nice things. One is that if you send an invitation and there's no response, then you don't have to keep looking every single day to see if they've responded. After 6 days, Editorial Manager will automatically uninvite them. And then the second thing is, if you do secure a reviewer and they're 2 weeks late in submitting, then they also get uninvited. First, we do follow up with them several times. We do send chase emails, because usually it's the case that they just lost track of a deadline, or something has come up and sometimes they need an extension. Usually that's what's happening. But we also don't want you to have to chase them all on your own, and we want you to have support from the editorial management board. Yeah, and the last thing is that all the communication is going to be through email, so just keep an eye on your email, and like what Dina said, please add us as a safe email contact so that you keep getting all the invitations that we're sending. Okay. All right. So once the reviews come in, then what? So you'll get an email. You'll get an email that says all the reviews are complete, and you'll go into Editorial Manager and you'll be able to see all the details for those reviews. So because we really encourage the reviewers to really think about the publication criteria and really use kind of a structured rubric to evaluate papers, you're also going to get these reviews in a structured form, because we've provided them a reviewer form that kind of helps them to say, does it meet this criteria? Does it meet this criteria? What are your general comments and things like that? We find that that's better practice equity-wise, so that people are being judged on the same levels and for the same questions. So I'll go into the quick guide, show you some of that. Let's see. Sorry, this is blocking. There we go. Okay. So there are 4 different decisions, and I'm sure you're familiar with them if you've been on an editorial board before. So this is major revision, minor revision, accept, and reject. So the different kind of things that would happen that would make you want to have one decision or the other are the following. So for reject, let's say that you get the manuscripts back, you get the reviews, they're high quality reviews with lots of comments, but they say that the methods are not well described, or that there's some fatal flaw in the methodology, or they point out that they didn't get ethics approval or something like that. Those are all reasons to reject at this stage. And typically they're a little bit more detailed because the reviewers really got to dig into the paper. And so it's a good practice to kind of highlight the points in your letter to the reviewers, or sorry, in your letter to the authors saying why you rejected the paper. It's a good idea to kind of highlight the reasons why, just to give them a nice explanation of the reasons that we're not going forward with their paper. A case of minor revision would be, for example, maybe there's a few sentences that need to be revised in the discussion, or maybe you need a few more details about a particular method, but you're fairly certain that once revised, that this paper will be at a high enough caliber for publication. So that in that case, you'd want to issue a minor revision. And again, you would just want to point out the things and highlight the things that are important for them to revise in order to have it later accepted. So the revision will come back and you'll make that decision at that point. A major revision would be more for something like there is conflicting data, or maybe one reviewer points out, oh, well, they really need to discuss this element, or maybe their conclusions are correct, but really I won't be convinced until I see a discussion of X, Y, and Z, or like a review of the research, something that would require like a major addition or revision to the paper. And really for author expectations, I'd say that if they get a minor revision, then usually author expectations is if they revise, then they will eventually be accepted for publication. And so that you can definitely give minor revisions several times, that's okay. But at the end of the day, probably the authors are expecting that their work will eventually get published. For a major revision, it can be a little bit more in the gray area. Authors don't typically expect, they're still in the revision process at that point, and they don't necessarily expect that their paper is going to be accepted. So if you issue a major revision and the paper comes back and you're still not satisfied, and perhaps even you see even more fatal flaws in the paper, it's still okay to reject after one round, and it's still helping the authors overall to have gotten all that feedback, because then they can improve their research. It's still better than just no feedback. So don't feel bad if you do need to reject after that, that's okay. And for accept, we all know what accept is, but I will say that once you accept, then it's very difficult to change anything in the paper from a production standpoint. So even for things like, oh, it needs very minor copy editing in paragraph 17, I would still just issue a minor revision at that stage and just have them do that. And then they can just do that and send back the next day, and then we can issue an accept. It's just production reasons why it can be difficult after an accept to go back and change things in the manuscript. Okay. All right, a couple of points about the decision letter. So as I've kind of alluded to before, we find it really important, especially for author service and for just general forwarding good science, to be able to give authors, no matter what the decision is, some feedback about why the decision was made. So in the decision letters, you'll go to click in Editorial Manager, make editor decision, and then you'll have a scroll down menu that will pop down, and you'll be able to pick accept, reject, minor decision, minor revision, major revision. And then it will have template text there, depending on what you choose. But all of them have this section highlighted right here where it says academic editor, please insert comments. And we ask that you delete that section and then just write your general comments. So even if it's an if it's like a minor revision, say, we really would like some minor copy editing, or if it's a major revision, kind of highlight those reasons that are the most important to revise, and kind of give some context to the authors about what are the most important thing to focus on for this revision. Yeah, and of course, you can use your judgment, and you know what kind of feedback that you would like. So be cordial, be nice, and be professional. I know you all will, but just reminding. And yeah, just give a little bit of context and make sure you let them know what your expectations are. Okay. And so with that, I'll hand back over to Dina.
Perfect, yep. And so my role here is just to recap everything that we've covered so far and to point you in the general resources and where you can get in contact with us. So all of the guides that we covered in this presentation are on your resources for editors webpage, which was sent to you during your initial welcome email, but also can be found on the PLOS Water website under publish and then resources for editors here. And so this links out directly to Editorial Manager, that screenshot guide we've mentioned a couple of times, and all of the different quick guides that we've covered in this presentation. I do want to point out another kind of neat resource that's on here, and this is this adjudicating decisions guide that Cassie helped develop. We have it in both a static PDF and searchable format, but also in this kind of fun interactive guide as well. And so this is helpful if you are encountering some common discrepancies, let's say in the peer review process, or let's say you're just kind of handling some miscommunications. So it's an interactive guide here where you can click through the theme of the issue that you're experiencing, and then even have some guidance on what it is that we would recommend in that situation, and even some sample decision letter text that you can pull from. So that's kind of just a neat guide, also found on that resources for editors page. And the last thing I want to close with here before we go into the question and answer session are the key contact emails that you would want to have on hand. So water@plos.org is our general shared inbox for most manuscript level queries. So if you have a question about what to do on a particular manuscript, or you're not sure about 2 different types of decisions, you might write into PLOS Water, or excuse me, water@plos.org with that question. It's a shared inbox, and so rest assured that it'll be routed to the appropriate person to answer that question. The second email address there is for my team, for the editorial board services team. This would be to contact if you're experiencing something that's outside of the manuscript specific process, and has to do with your experience overall. So let's say, for example, you're not receiving as many manuscript invitations as you would like. You would write into us and let us know, and maybe we can kind of nudge Susan and say, hey, keep your eye out for special manuscripts in this subject area and send them over here. That would be an example there. And of course, all of our contacts with Susan and Jenna and Pierre are listed here as well. And as a reminder, you'll get this slide presentation, so you don't have to memorize those right now. So with that, we'll move into the question and answer session. And because there's so few of us, I don't really feel the need to moderate in any way. So if you do have any questions, just please feel free to unmute yourself and ask them now.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question about the perception of impact. I know from other videos, previous videos from PLOS, the big PLOS. I remember it was Michael Eisen video, right? The one when first PLOS was being launched. He said about at PLOS we don't think about the impact of the paper as the one consideration if it's going to be published or not, but PLOS would think about the internal factor of the paper, the research factors, the data, the analysis, and so on, not the perception of impact, significant impact. I was wondering if it still applies in PLOS water, because I think we eventually we're going to face a problem when invited reviewer think that this paper is good in terms of the flow, the science, the reproducibility, and so on, but he or she doesn't think that it has a global impact somehow. I need to clarify that. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I can answer that question. Yeah, so you're completely right that it does apply to PLOS water. So we don't judge on perceived impact. You know, we're not looking at the work and saying, how many people is this going to be interesting to? Will it be worth it to publish or not? Because research also shows that perceived impact isn't actually a great indicator of actual impact later, too. So really, what we're really concerned about is the methodology solid? Is it solid science? So we want to make sure that even if it's a smaller study, it can be great science. And really, we need a place for all of those smaller study research articles to be, so that when you can see them all together, then you have a record of that. And, one study or 100 studies could make the difference. So yeah, it's really important to us. We don't have a print periodical, it's all online. So we're also not limited space-wise in that regard. So we can publish as many papers really as we reasonably can handle. And so yeah, we don't want to limit in that way.
Thank you, Susan.
Good morning, and I have a very small question. So it's about the technical appearance of the manuscript. So sometimes I have been like reviewing many times, but sometimes the manuscripts are submitted even without the continuous line numbering and the page numbering, and I have encountered many times. So in the PLOS water, do you have like a previous check for such kind of things before it is being sent to the reviewers?
That is a good question. I know that we have a long list of technical checks at each stage. So even before it comes to me, there's a long list of technical checks to make sure that things are there. I'm not exactly sure if line numbering is part of that check. Dina, do you happen to know? We could find out for you.
Yeah, I would have to find out. I know at PLOS 1, for example, we don't have any sort of preferred or forced formatting in terms of presence of line numbering. And so I would assume that would apply for PLOS water as well, though I would need to follow up.
Because the only reason I was thinking is this is the first time I'm trying to be an editor, but as a reviewer, I have encountered like so many times I cannot comment because I cannot say this is the specific location I am talking about if they don't even have a page number or line number. So that's the only thing I was considering about. Thank you.
Yes, I can definitely understand that frustration. If you have any issues like that and you don't really know what to do, you can feel free to email me, or you can email water@PLOS, depending on how specific it is. If you don't know who to email, water's a great choice. If you want to email me directly, that's also great. And I'm happy to answer, because those things tend to be case-by-case basis. So yeah, I can help you out.
Thank you very much.
All right, keeping us moving along here. That concludes the question and answer portion, and we'll just go into some final closing statements, and then we can hang out a little bit just for some social time as well. So my last things here, again, just to reiterate, as Susan mentioned multiple times, Pierre's listed his email there. Please do reach out to us at any time. We welcome all questions, comments, feedback, both positive and negative. Yeah, we're here to support you. Another way would that's great to get in touch with us is on social media. I've listed the PLOS Water Twitter here. I would say that that's probably our most active social media. We are on LinkedIn as well, but PLOS Water on Twitter is a great way if you are there, and we can help kind of retweet your research as well. And so that's just a helpful link to have. And that goes into the next piece here about being a PLOS Water ambassador, because we're all a part of this brand new journal and we're helping to try and grow and introduce it to the world. So please sing its praises and tell all your friends. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Pierre and Susan to just kind of say some final words here.
Thanks, Dina. From me, thank you, Mohan and Dasapta, for being here today, and thank you for your for the contributions to PLOS Water that you're going to be making. It's terrifically appreciated. Yeah, I think we're on the foot slopes of something very exciting here. So let's see where this journey takes us. And thanks, Dina and Susan, again, for a very informative session.
No problem. Yeah, and I will just say, we also have a blog that just launched a month ago. So it's called the PLOS Latitude blog. So if you want to post a blog, please let me know. Also, feel free to tweet as much as you want. And we're very happy to retweet your research. So just tag us at PLOS Water, and I'll be looking at that frequently. I also saw that background today on Twitter, so I saw your posting. Yeah, so, and any other questions, please feel free to reach out to me.
I'm going to stop recording now.